Hello guys and girls. So in this video, we are going to continue with iterators. In previous video, we have seen some fundamental concepts around iterators. In this video, we are going to take a deep look at how iter function works. Mind you, in past, I've said already that you may not find yourself using iter function in like usually you may not find yourself using it, but and most of the times it's used by Python itself, but in some specialized cases you may have to use it. So it's better to learn and understand about how it works, and it's because we are covering iterators, so it's incomplete without knowing how iter function works. So let's jump right in. So in this example that you're seeing in front of me, what are we going to learn in this is an iter function with a callable. So in the past, we have seen an iter function which works like you pass an iterable to it, and it will return you with an iterator, and then you can do whatever you have to do with that iterator. You can do looping and stuff, but we haven't seen yet how an iter function with callable works. Okay, mind you that I'm saying that iter function with callables. So let's take a look. Here I have this class. This class has init function, kind of like it's a constructor, initializes this variable, and I have this call method, special dunder method, which makes the objects that will be instantiated out of this class as callable, which means all the objects that will be instantiated, they will be callable, right? Uh, that's okay. So this is the syntax. This is the signature of the iter function with a callable object. So basically what you have to do is you have to pass your callable object, and you have to pass a sentinel. So what this sentinel is, it basically tells, okay, if you start looping, which means whatever the iterator it is generated, if you try to loop over it, it will stop exactly at a point when you reach this item. In our collections, if you in our list, if you see, we have like 4 items, 4 names, but what we are essentially saying here is that, okay, when you reach this particular name, you have to stop. So okay, that's okay. So let's try to run it and see what's the example, what it has to like print, but then we will see. So it has printed all the 4 players. Seems okay, but let me run it again. Okay, it has printed Virat Kohli twice here. It has printed KL Rahul, MS Dhoni, Virat Kohli. It has printed MS Dhoni, Virat Kohli, KL Rahul. But till now, I haven't seen. Now it just printed 1 player, right? Okay, what's happening behind? Iterator has taken this callable, which means when you try to loop over this iterator, it is going to call this. It is going to invoke this callable, which is in turn going to execute this function. And this function is going to return one of the player randomly chosen out of it, right? We are using this rand int function just to index to one of the uh, index in this list, and then return that particular item. And once that item is returned, it matches. Okay, is the item that is returned, is it Rohit Sharma? I mean, is it matching this a string? If it is, then it will stop. It will not print it. Rather, it will break out of that loop. But if it doesn't, it will keep on printing. So that was the reason that we were seeing that sometimes it was printing 1 player, sometimes 4 players, sometimes 3 player. Let me run it multiple times. So this time, if you see, it has printed like a lot of names, but it never printed Rohit Sharma. If you don't believe me, let me change this. Let me put it as so what essentially we are saying that if this comes, break the loop. So we should not see Virat Kohli in the name. What will be the names will be printed. Whatever the names will be printed, we should not see this Virat Kohli name. So so we saw for the first time we saw Rohit Sharma. and then KL Rahul, no Virat Kohli. Now I think on the first time it didn't print anything, just because for first time of the loop only, I think this rand int generated an index which was actually fetching Virat Kohli. That's why it didn't print anything. And in the first iteration, the loop was like discontinued. So okay, that I think it's easy to understand. But tell me one thing: what makes this object callable? This special call method. If you remove it, you see this error comes. If you try to run it, it says, okay, in the iter VW, V must be callable. What is V? V is ER here. ER is this employee record object. That's cool. So let's, how do we make it callable? Let's make it like this. It's okay. But there is another variant of the iter function which we have already seen. Okay, before I get there, tell me one thing. I have in the past I have told you that okay, iter functions take iterable and they return you the iterator. In this function, and for an object to be an iterable, it has to implement the iter dunder iter method or the get item method. But this function doesn't implement any one of those, right? Still, iter function is taking it and returning an iterator out of it. I hope I'm making sense. What I'm trying to say is this employee record function or any object instantiated out of it would not be an iterable just because it doesn't implement any one of the iter method, dunder iter method, or get item, dunder get item method. It doesn't implement. That's why this is not an iterable. But still, we are getting an iter out of it. We are getting an iterator out of it based on this iter method, and then we are looping and printing. But if we try to use the same, but how are we able to do this? Just because this iterables iter function with callable doesn't require your object to be an iterable. That's not a mandatory thing. That's why you were able to pass this ER just because it was callable. So the only prerequisite that this iter function with callable has is your object should be callable. And that's why you were able to print everything. Mind you, if it is a callable, then you can also pass a function. That's the reason it says any kind of a callable you can pass here so that you can loop over it. And with function, we'll see it in the next example. But let's try to use it, use this with the older iter method that doesn't take a callable. So this is the signature of it. It doesn't take callable. You're already seeing this error, but let's try to print it. Let's try to execute it. And it says that employee record is not an iterable. It is a callable, but it's not an iterable. This iter method, which doesn't take any callable because its signature is like that. That's how Python has defined it. So if you just pass one parameter, one argument to it, then it means that Python is expecting whatever you're passing has to be an iterable. But this function isn't an iterable. To make it iterable, as I said, you need to implement any one of the dunder iter method or dunder get item method. So let's try implementing dunder get item method. I think I need to take an index, and I can simply return okay, self dot employee names and index. I think that's all we need to do. And let's try to run this again. And yes, it prints all the four numbers, all the four players. Why did it print all four players? Just because this time iter function got me an iterator that will work based on indexing. This time when you run your for loop, this for loop is going to pass indexes every time to your get item method with starting with 0. And once it reaches index out of the bound, it will generate an index error exception, as we have already seen in the past. Similar example. And once the index error exception is generated, your function will stop looping, and that's all. But let's try to remove this call object, which means now this ER object is not a callable. And let's try to use it with the iter method that takes callable. And I think you're already seeing this error, but let's see what is printed by Python. So it says it must be a callable, and now it's not a callable. Though it's an iterable, but it's not a callable. And that's why this iter gives an error. So what we have learned so far, we have two iter methods, one that works with callables, one that works with iterables. But both the iter methods will give you an iterator using which you can loop over the items, right? Okay. One thing that I would like to tell is this iterator that you get out of this iter function gets exhausted once your loop stops. Okay, what does that mean? Let's say, okay, let me make it callable, and because we are using it, let's continue here. So once we have printed everything here, let's try to print it. Okay, it printed all these 4 players. I think because it's printing variable number of players every time. So let's not take this example. Let's instead take the example that is with this iter function. I'll tell you. I'll get back to that as well. I'm taking this first so that because it's easier to understand with this example compared to the previous one. So here what we are doing is that right now it implements this get item method, which means it's an iterable. ER is iterable, and you will get an iterator, and then using that iterator you can loop. Let's print here. So it will every time print you for all the 4 players, like because it will work on indexing 0, 1, 2, 3. All the 4 players will be printed here. But if you want to print again, let's say I'm just having this printing again, and for I in IT and print I. If I have this, you see I got this printing again string printed here, but nothing was printed after that, which means this for loop never ran, right? What happened was once you run a single for loop, this using this iterator, once it was generated out of the iter function, once you have used it in a for loop and it got exhausted, you cannot use it again, which means iterator, you cannot reset it to the beginning and use it again to loop. And if you want to do that, you will have to call the iter function again, which means you can, if you have to print it again, you have to call this, and you have to pass your ER, and you run. So you see this printing again was printed, and then 4 players were printed again. So that's the reason. So what I'm trying to convey is this iterator, you can think of it as a pointer to a singly linked list. Once you run that iter function, you get the pointer to the first node of the list, and every time you start looping, you are actually incrementing that pointer. And once that pointer reaches the list that points to null, at that time it stops, but your pointer is incremented and it actually points to null. So that's why you cannot use it. You have to reset that pointer back to the original position, back to the starting position, so that you can use it. So that's the analogy that I'm just telling you. It's not the linked list, but that's an analogy that you can think of. But okay, as I said that, okay, you can see the similar pattern in here as well. So let's say we have got this iterator and we have printed everything, and let me restore this thing. And if you want to print it again, let's see what printing after printing again, you should not see anything anytime. So Printing again was the last statement, last string, and nothing was printed after that. You will never see anything getting printed after printing again. And I have ran it multiple times. I hope you understand now that once an iterator is exhausted, you cannot use it again. Okay, let's move to the next example. In this example, it's very similar, just that it also should demonstrate the use of an iter method with callable, iter function with callable. But in this case, your callable is your function. Your callable is a function rather than an object. So this function works exactly same way. It has this employee names list and generates one of the employees randomly. And we are saying that if you find Virat Kohli, then just stop your iteration. So just I'll quickly demonstrate that. So you will not see Virat Kohli getting printed. So that's the thing. You can change this to any player. Let's say MS Dhoni, and then you start printing. You will not see MS Dhoni printed anywhere. Okay. So you saw this long list, but MS Dhoni was not printed. So that's the entire thing I wanted to demonstrate here. So, and with that, I would like to end this video. I hope you learned about iter method, how it works with callable and how it works with iterable. So we are going to continue with iterators for one or two more videos, and I think we should be covering it pretty well. And I hope to see you in the next one.